Namaskar to all of you, and once again, welcome to this second part of the celebration of 150 years of Sri Aurobindo and 75 years of India's independence, which is falling on 15th of August 2022. But the celebration has begun from this month onwards. We had the first program on 12th of August, and this is the second program which is going to be the launching of the Transform India project, which is a part of this 150 years of celebration. And before we begin, we would like to do the invocation. And this time we do the invocation by playing three verses from Sri Aurobindo's Bhavani Bharati. So I will share the screen and then we will play and meditate on Sri Aurobindo's Bhavani Bharati. So that was Sri Aurobindo's Bhavani Bharati, where he has made a prayer that may the prosperity, may the divine presence be always on this land. Every aspect of this land be filled with that divine presence. And he has said that the country which is satisfied with its glorious past can never make a progress. To make a progress and to contribute positively towards the progressive evolution of the humanity, every nation which has a glorious past and it also has a glorious future, but it has to be taken forward, not just clinging to the past, but making the past as a foundation, making the past as a springboard to leap towards the greater future. So, with this idea, the Transform India project has been initiated to invite the youth of India to participate in different fields. We have chosen Gitanjali is going to speak on it elaborately what this project is. And the whole purpose is how do we bring that spiritual wisdom to every aspect of life and build new forms of literature, new forms of religion, new forms of philosophy, new forms of design. So, in every aspect of life, that spiritual wisdom has to get expressed. With these few words, I invite Palak to introduce the guests of today and take it forward from here. Palak.
Thank you, Sampada. A very warm welcome and good evening to all of you. Thank you for joining us in a conversation with Gitanjali ji, Professor Subhash Kak, and Sonam Wangchuk. While these names are not new to most of us, I would like to provide a brief glimpse into the lives of our guests today. We have with us Gitanjali ji, who is a social entrepreneur and educationist. After having founded several businesses and social ventures, she is setting up Himalayan Institute of Alternatives, Ladakh, as its founding CEO and dean. HIAL is an alternative institute for mountain development that aims to revolutionize higher education in India through the pedagogy of contextual and experiential learning. She is a spiritual seeker with a deep interest in Indian spirituality. She is a lifelong student of Sri Aurobindo and the Mother, Sanskrit, Vedas, and Upanishads, and strives to apply her learnings gleaned from these sacred texts to indigenize existing educational frameworks. She is also the founder of today's initiative, Transform India, a collective action in line with the forces of evolution to build new social, economic, and political models in line with India's spirit and culture. Transform India has been her dream for 30 years, ever since she was introduced to the true and real India through the book Foundations of Indian Culture by Sri Aurobindo. We welcome you, Gitanjali ji. We also have with us Professor Subhash Kak, who needs no introduction as such. He is an Indian American computer scientist and a Hindutva based historical revisionist. He is an alumna of NIT Srinagar and IIT Delhi. He is the Regents Professor at Computer Science Department at Oklahoma State University, Stillwater, an honorary visiting professor of engineering at Jawaharlal Nehru University, and a member of Indian Prime Minister's Science, Technology and Innovation Advisory Council, PMSTISC. He has published on the history of science, the philosophy of science, ancient astronomy, the history of mathematics. He has also published he has also published on archaeoastronomy and advanced the idea of indigenous Aryans. He has multiple books published across the fields of quantum theory, cybersecurity, artificial intelligence, and Sanskrit. In 2019, the government of India awarded him with Padma Shri, the fourth highest civilian award in India. We welcome you, sir. We also have with us Mr. Sonam Wangchuk, who really needs no introduction. He was born in the Trans-Himalayan region of Ladakh in Jammu and Kashmir, India. Though a mechanical engineer by education, he has been mostly working in the field of education reform for more than 30 years. In 1988, just after he finished his engineering studies, he founded Students' Educational and Cultural Movement of Ladakh, which brought reforms in the government school system in Ladakh. He has always stood for empowering local communities with education that is relevant to them so that they can take stewardship of their ecosystems. He has led multiple innovations in designing and building solar heated buildings that are low cost, made of earth or mud, but maintain 15 degrees Celsius even when the outside temperature is minus 15 in Ladakhi winters, as well as ice stupa, artificial glaciers to solve the water crisis in high altitude deserts like Ladakh, which stores the wasting system waters in winter in the form of giant ice cones or stupas and release the water in late spring as they melt, just when the farmers need water. He is now extending this experience of learning by doing to higher education and is setting up Himalayan Institute of Alternatives, Ladakh, HIAL, along with Ms. Gitanjali. He has won several awards and titles, such as Raman Magsaysay Award in 2018, Global Award for Sustainable Architecture, the Rolex Award for Enterprise 2016 in Hollywood, USA, the Terra Award 2016 for World's Best Earth Buildings in Lyon, France, amongst many others. We are very glad to have all of you with us. And without wasting much time, I would like to hand over to Gitanjali ji to take it forward from here.
Thank you, Palak. I'm so glad to be having this conversation with Professor Subhash and Sonam Wangchuk, because India needs practitioners, people who can go out there and achieve excellence. And this whole movement of Transform India, while it would depend on recovering knowledge systems, but it would be about creating abundantly in all these social, economic, cultural, political fields. So today we would be touching upon all these 12 areas. What are they? Why are they important? Why does it need to be looked into towards nation building? What is it that in the last 70 years we have done right and we can learn from? What is it that we need to do differently? And we are calling this a Mahayagya. A Mahayagya is a collective effort. Mother has said many times that it is collaboration that is the key. If very lovingly I have to look at one of the things that we miss in India, it is lack of this team spirit. Because for the past many years, our ideal was individual liberation. And even our performing arts are more of solo performances. Whereas when we need to create on the ground, it is collectivity coming together, and where we may have to learn something from the West. If we look at the orchestra with 100 members or ballet with 50, there is a beautiful harmony and symphony that is achieved together by hundreds of people working together. There is a certain order there. Each one does his best, gives his excellent performance, and something beautiful is created. So we have to move away from having liberation as the aim of life to the true Vedic spirituality of making life better through the spiritual forces. So that is a big fundamental shift, which we will look at what is true Indian spirituality. But before we move into that and take valuable inputs and from Professor Subhash, who has gracefully agreed to be the advisor on transformindia.com, and Mr. Sonam Wangchuk, who is also the founding trustee on this, along with Dr. Sampath. We will look at why and what we mean by this collaboration. So here we mean we partner with all kinds of organizations, right from government, non-governmental, corporate houses, individuals who are practitioners, who are in science, in architecture, in art and culture, in literature, because the East and the West, the best of it all, because of two reasons. First of all of us are a part of a puzzle. I mean, there's a pun there if we are not puzzle ourselves. We are all parts of a puzzle that can only come together into a beautiful jigsaw puzzle, only when we rise to our highest and contribute. And the puzzle will remain incomplete even if one of these are not represented. And secondly, the whole exercise is going to be very inclusive, very comparative, because if we are aligning it with Sri Aurobindo's 150th birth anniversary, we have to understand who Sri Aurobindo is. He was somebody who synthesized everything. He synthesized East and West. He synthesized all the past knowledge systems. When he writes, he makes references to as easily to Plato or Pythagoras or to Homer, to Thiruvalluvar, to Tagore, and others. So he represents a mind that is taken the entire, past together in a synthetic way formulated the path to the future. So he belongs to entire humanity and he belongs to the future. And this is the takeaway we need to take from his life, that we need to come together, all of us. Nobody is exclusive. Nobody is a sole custodian of India's future. You know, all of us have our little humble bit to contribute, and it is in that cumulative effect that the future of India will be built and India will be transformed. So, with this understanding, I would like to first of all quickly share the screen of transformindia.com so that those of you who haven't visited it yet. So this is a simple site which talks about these 12 areas. And if each of these areas are clicked, it tells you about a brief on what is expected, what is that new that we are building. And this is just a framework over the next 2 years, which is just a start, because Transform India has to continue for the next 50 to 100 years. But this 2 years, we are aligning with Suffolk so that we initiate this entire process. And there is a simple write-up which talks about what this area is about. And I would request the youth and the mentors to go through this to see which of these areas resonates with them. And these 12 areas are as comprehensive as possible. For instance, spirituality and philosophy. There are so many narratives about what is true spirituality today. So we will all collectively find out what is true spirituality and consciousness. What do we need to do about language and literature? How do we need to govern ourselves? What is art and culture? How does it contribute? Health and wellness, education and research, technology and artisanship, dairy and culture, design and architecture, business and economics, humanities and liberal arts, and the pure sciences. So these are the 12 areas in which India, unfortunately, though it has done some experiments, but it has been following the prevalent models, and some of which are not in line with its genius or its culture. So here, after going through this, you could apply here as a change maker or as a mentor. And after today's launch, we would give about a month for all of you to apply. And then each of the areas would be coordinated or mentored by a thought leader or an organization who is working in that field. For instance, in politics and governance, we are partnering with Rashtrian School of Public Leadership, which Malaji is representing, and Shobhit and his colleagues are going to be leading that initiative. And the youngsters are going to be the mentees who work with them. We will draw out a milestone about how we need to go about it in the next 2 years, so that at the end of 2 years, we have a kind of a action research program or a document on which new action and new work can be based on. So this is not just coming to a webinar and talking about what is the problem or what needs to be done. Here the invitation is for all of us to start working, and this is a platform that will help to do that. Now, to take this discussion forward, maybe I would request Subhash Kakji and Sonam Wangchuk about literature and language. You know, what is the importance of retrieving, let's say, vernacular languages and Sanskrit?
Okay, well, thank you, Gitanjali ji. Wonderful introduction. You put it all in perspective, and it's not only something that is going to be of value to India, but the entire world, because the field of education across the world is facing a crisis because of all the disruptive changes that are happening right now, not only because of the COVID pandemic, and that is, of course, creating a lot of problems and running of colleges. And people are wondering, well, how do we introduce technology? But also the whole question of what is education all about? Is education just learning certain skills, such as that of programming or getting to know about history or geography or other social and technical sciences, because some of those things can also be learned on one's own, because we have technology, we have free courses, we have continuing sources of information as in television and many others. So people are asking, well, what is it that society and educational institutes and certainly centers such as the Sri Aurobindo Center should be doing? And in that, what Sri Aurobindo and the mother talked about, the whole question of development of the mind, because unlike 30, 40, 50, 100 years ago, where to obtain information itself was a big challenge and you had to go in person to a library and get hold of a book and then open it. Now all that information is available at your fingertips. You can just Google something, but it's created a new challenge, which is that you have so much of stuff on the internet, you don't know what is reliable, you don't know how to go about navigating through it and how to make sense of it. And I think that's where arts and literature come in and turn out to be very important, because they provide you the capacity to, first of all, synthesize knowledge, because knowledge or experience of the world is not just related to doing things in a particular way in specific fields, but it is synthesizing everything. It is taking the different aspects of what you have experienced and putting it all together in your own mind to obtain a unique insight. So ultimately, it's about getting in touch with your own intuition, prajna. So, how do we get in touch with your intuition? Because if your intuition is great, then you make sense of the world. In fact, what is the difference between a great scientist or a great writer and a not so great writer? It's not that their command over mathematics or grammar is going to be different, but it's their intuition that's going to be different. The one who is successful or who has greater insight is able to grab on to different aspects of their experience and then laying it out in a new way so that it is a creative act, and it also becomes a exemplar for everybody else, because
The
not only
importance of vernacular language, the
and
recovery of.
yes, right. And I think the importance of our own languages, which the English call vernacular languages, but they are as great languages as any other. It's so important because you cannot truly master things unless you have gone through all of that knowledge, first of all, in your own mother tongue, because then you have a deeper connection to your own intuition about those things. So I think it's great to learn as many languages as possible and great to know English or other European languages as well. But I think what India needs to do is, first of all, create avenues for everybody to master a lot of the fundamental stuff in their own language. And even in programming, this is something that I mentioned before, that one need not be in a situation where, first of all, you have to climb the mountain of English, and only then can you be exposed to computer programming. In other countries like Hungary or Israel, and these are very small countries, people learn programming in their own languages. And of course, you can use the Latin script.
Yeah, Professor Subhash, we'll come back to each of the topics one by one. I would now quickly want to take Sonam's reaction to mother tongue, because he's been also working in this since 25 years, making Ladakhi the medium. Sonam, would you like to share how it helped Ladakhi students and why it's important?
Well, generally, mother tongue is a great asset. It's a great tool that you are almost born with. Yeah, even before you're born, you develop. So it's a crime, really, if we strip the child of this tool that is so customized to his her way of expression and suddenly give them something else that they are not familiar is not the worst thing, but their parents and the surroundings are also unfamiliar. Children are very good at learning languages, provided it is prevalent in the surroundings. If it is not, and you make it into a language or to open the doors, keys to the doors of the world, the phenomenon, science and technology, then itself becomes a big barrier, and that's what we are suffering. While in Ladakh, we have been struggling to make it so, to make Ladakhi so far, because we've been in J&K, it has not been fully possible. We look forward to times when this would be even more possible now as a union territory. But there are, of course, many, many examples.
Okay, I think there's an internet problem there, but 90% of India does not know English even after 70 years. And the entire education is in English in India, the higher education.
Sweden, which are much smaller than Denmark, but they would never do their primary education.
You were frozen for some time, we couldn't hear you.
That's because I'm in Ladakh also partly. Frozen in so many ways. So nature has left us frozen, high and dry. Well, so I was saying how various communities like the Tibetans have gone back to mother tongue as a medium of instruction, and then later you find that the schools, their students do better than our students in India who go through the best of private schools with English medium, because mother tongue opens up your faculties and gives you that free movement that you could only get from your own language. I mean, it's okay to have English to be digital coolies of the West. You could do little more of IT, but that's just second-hand work, backyard work for them. To become original, to become innovative, to find solutions to problems, challenges, you really need your mother tongue. So English, yes, is very important today in the world, but even that would be acquired best if you had mother tongue as your foundation and the tool to open up. For example, I personally didn't even go to a school till about 9. I was brought up in my mother tongue by my mother with whatever she could teach me on the farm. And I think that was the best childhood I could ever have. It gave me the confidence to learn languages within months. I ended up learning some 9 languages. Takes me 6 months to learn a new language. So why would we waste 16 years to speak broken English when you can learn English in 6 months? If your confidence is unbroken, then the language definitely doesn't break. But when you are, turning pink and blue speaking a sentence, then you don't do well. When your mind is filled with superiority and inferiority about languages like we are today, it doesn't work. So I think even with English and its need, India needs to go back to mother tongue as a language for acquiring all the other knowledge. I would have preferred an Indian language to become the national language, lingua franca. But of course, our regions don't get along together, south and north and east and west. I find it very silly that to some of us, London seems closer than Delhi. So, or, than the north of India. I wish every Indian learned 4 languages at least, and we have faculties enough to learn 8.
So, so it is a good thing that the national education policy has been very revolutionary in this regard in India, and it has brought in teaching in mother tongue till class 6 or 8. And to imagine that this was started by the mother in the ashram school like 50 years ago, where children started, also mother tongue, to know mother tongue. So
no harm if North Indians learn all this and open up every child's.
yes. I think, Sonam, your connection is a bit weak today. That is something that happens in Ladakh. So I'll be filling in whenever you freeze, in any way. So I understand what you say is very right, an Indian language. And what other can that language be other than Sanskrit, which has to be made living and contemporary? So Professor Subhash Kak, what would you say to recovery of Sanskrit and making it a living language?
Oh, absolutely. I think it can be done. You look at the example of the Israelis, they took Hebrew, which had really been dead for more than 1,000 years, and they revived it within maybe a decade or so. So I think it can be done. And Sanskrit has not been dead. Sanskrit is still alive. A lot of people speak it, and it's a part of the daily ritual of millions and millions of people. But so it can be done, but in order for it to be done successfully, what is required is to translate world literature into Sanskrit and do a lot of other stuff which probably we have not paid attention to. But it can be done. I don't think it's a challenge. I think it's a great thing. But I again go back to what Sonam ji said. I totally agree with him. We need to learn first in the mother tongue, and after that we can learn many more languages. I think that will be a wonderful thing, and I'm glad that the new education policy does stress that.
And a child's brain is totally underestimated, because with my experience with my son, he was introduced to 5 languages and he picked up all 5 before the age of 5. So actually we just underestimate the brain of the child. And Professor Subhash, last time you made a very fantastic comment that world literature has to be written not just in vernacular, and today you said in Sanskrit, because we also need to, we just don't need to translate our vernacular or Indian literature into English, but we need to translate the world's best literature into Indian languages. So that is, so these are the practical things that Transform India will be looking at and working over the next few years. Now, Sonam, you mentioned very beautiful thing that it's only in mother tongue that true innovation can happen. And the last 70 years of India, the experience cannot be further from the truth. I mean, today, even common brands in TV or mobiles are not present from India, and even that so-called success story of IT, as you mentioned, it is like we are running sweatshops or, backyards for large corporations. We don't even have our own products in hardware or software. So you have been doing, so next we come to innovation, technology, and artisanship. Is this industrialization the way? How should local technology be developed? How should artisan and handicraft be kept alive? So from your experience in Ladakh, where you've done so many innovations, what would you say about local technology?
Mm-hmm. So again, connecting with the case of mother tongue and the state of our country, and connecting it to innovation and technology needed for the country, I find it a very amusing and rather sad situation. Half of our country, or actually much more than half, are getting their upbringing in mother tongue, but they are looked down upon as the poorer, rural, and so on. Most of the government schools that function in the rural areas have mother tongue as the language, and the urban ones would have English in private schools. Now, the rural population of India is therefore very innovative, because they have this originality of thinking. But unfortunately, because they get disadvantaged in formal higher education, so their innovativeness gets limited to what we call jugaad, which is a sort of inferior form of what could have been innovations and breakthrough inventions. So because of our own self-imposed restrictions and limitations, the innovative half of our country are not able to access latest technologies, digital interventions and softwares and so on. So they make do with very original, but still very short of what could win the world. So they remain as jugaad. They are nonetheless very innovative. The other half, who are put through English medium private schools and so on, they are very savvy with the languages and the etiquettes and so on, but are not innovative, they are not original, and they end up becoming digital coolies to the corporates of the world. So it's a very sad situation. Whereas if we had been more original, these rural jugaad people would have given multinational solutions to the world and companies and so on. um, that's not the most important thing. I'm not really so much for multinational companies. What is perhaps more important is that we gear our innovative minds towards solving our own problems. Even for that, our rural youth need more science than only jugaad. So if we had a better combination of higher education in the same originality of India and the language of India, they would have had more command on use of physics, use of chemistry, and solved many problems in India, rather than always aping the West or getting ready-made products from them. For example, I feel like a small proportion of our country would get, say, refrigerator technology from the West. It is expensive, it is polluting, not easily affordable for all. Whereas what perhaps India needs more is simple evaporative cooling, mastered to the level that it can do wonders in large scale in the rural areas, in keeping food preserved for longer. For example, the matka technology is what evaporative cooling is. And I saw that one such pot maker, pottery family started developing Mitti Cool, extending this matka technology of evaporative cooling to make refrigerators. Now, these are kinds of technologies that the whole of the country and perhaps most of the world needs, because we can't just say we switch on the refrigerator and then you release all the emissions and till recently all the CFCs and make holes in the ozone layer and greenhouse gases and so on. Whereas our own solutions, if taken elegantly forward, could become world-winning ideas. But this person who is a kumhar has many limitations. He's still seen as a poor jugaad rather than a world-winning technology. So we need to really be more original and give more chance to original ideas. I sometimes feel very sad. I always say when I go to IITs and the higher institutes of technologies and see the students there, doing robo wars, racing drones. These could be something that the teenagers in the West could indulge, because they have hardly any problems left to solve in their rural areas and places. We in India really have many more important things to do than racing robots or racing drones or making robots break each other. So I think a lot of Indian minds are being wasted aping these Western countries. And it's not that they have really solved, they have actually made problems bigger. They would rather do well to learn from simple technologies like in India, which do not cause pollution and so on. So they have solved their problems with very inappropriate technologies and are indulging in these inappropriate games and uh, um, you know competitions and so on. Rather, I would like to see our institutes in India using simpler technologies, like compost making from your waste in the home and waste in animal waste and so on. These are more needed in our country than drones and robots.
Yeah.
Fine where we need, but that's not where our youth should be, invested in. Mm.
So thank you, Sonam, for your thoughts. And Professor Subhash, how would you take it forward? I mean, why is it that MIT has, let's say, hundreds of patents by its students every year, whereas we don't say the same about India? Of course, what Sonam says is that we are cut off from our roots, and we are not applying ourselves to the problems of the context. We have lost original thinking. So, where do you think pure maths and sciences, how should it be taught that it can aid along with the mother tongue and the understanding of Indian way of sustainable technology? Is there some way that math and science, the way it is being taught, does it need to be looked at?
Well, I agree with Sonam ji. I think this whole divide that we have right now, the English medium schools in the cities and the mother tongue medium schools everywhere else. And even in the cities, you have divide. You have some government schools which are not properly funded. And I think the point that Sonam made about a lot of creativity which is bottled up in the countryside amongst people because they are creativity because they are in touch with nature, with actual processes, with upkeep of animals and everything else. So in their cleverness, they come up with what has been called jugaad. But really what we need is how that jugaad can be reinforced with science. So I think this is really a big challenge. This divide that we have in education needs to go, and it can only go if science is taken with in much more uh, in a much more wholesome way to all corners of the world. So young people, no matter what their background, no matter what their mother tongue, can learn sciences, can learn programming, can develop systems that they think would be useful to them. And I think that will then unleash all the creative forces that young people have. And then other things will also happen because for patents, as Gitanjali, as you mentioned, for patents, you need several other things. You have an idea, then you need mentors who take that idea and perhaps set up little groups and say, how do we put it together so that we have a product which would be useful to a much larger group of people or communities, and maybe not only in India, perhaps beyond that also. So you need other processes, other systems in place for that to happen. But that will happen only if the first stages are properly addressed.
And how
And
important is this pride in one's culture? Because maths and sciences, even at a postgraduate level, the students here hardly know about Bodhayana or Mahavir, or as you have translated the Vaisheshika. Most of the students are not aware of the contribution of either. On one hand, it has been glorified like the Vimanas from India, or on the other hand, there is absolute ignorance of the true contribution India had in pure maths and sciences. And that is why there is a feeling of inferiority complex, that confidence that yes, we can create because we are proud about what we once did and we can do it again. So because you have been translating so many of these texts and you have been finding not only parallels in modern science, but also you say that the future of science, which the West has reached a dead end in, some of the answers can be found in India. So how much of knowing our Indian contributions to math and science is important for this process of innovation and confidence to do new things?
I think the fundamental problem is that over the 150 years of British rule, the idea was developed by British thinkers and administrators, perhaps for the sake of ruling India much more effectively. They said, well, Indians didn't have science, so they need us, or Indians don't know how to rule themselves because they are divided too much by caste and so on. Therefore, they need us. And having repeated that again and again, Indians very sadly have internalized all these ideas. And these ideas are not true because as all scholars across the world would say, that India was one of the great centers of the sciences, uh, in mathematics, in technology, in medicine, and many others. And so we don't have to have a false sense of the past. We need to know the past or what it was, so that we address issues that confront us in a way where we use all the faculties that need to be used, logic to the extent that it needs to be used. And if you have self-confidence, then somehow solutions emerge from your own intuition. So all that is necessary. Self-confidence is the most important thing for creativity as well. You have to believe in yourself. If you're only trying to copy others, you will never be able to catch up. I think what we have been doing for the past 50, 70 years is just copy the West in its outer form without even knowing how Western creativity, or all human beings are the same all over the world. But how do they do it? Because they have a culture which is where self-confidence is promoted, while in India, our education has not done so. And one way to promote self-confidence is to have a proper idea of the past, of the contributions that were made in the past. And the other point that Gitanjali that you mentioned was, well, Indian thought may have in it things or lessons which would be important for modern science. And that comes from the fact that India has, or Indian sciences or Indian thought has devoted a lot of attention to the problem of consciousness. And that problem of consciousness is the frontier research area in science, in many different fields. In computer science, how does the brain have consciousness while a computer doesn't? In physics, in neuroscience. And I think some of the difficulties that modern sciences are facing right now could be avoided, or solutions to those could be found if we were to know better what our own traditions or traditions of various kinds have addressed this problem in the past. So
Could you give an
certainly from
example?
that perspective, yeah.
To give a practical example, you spoke about black matter the other day, or
Yeah, as a practical example, one of the biggest crises in physics is that physics cannot explain why stars and galaxies are moving at the speeds that they are moving, because that's not consistent with either Newton's gravitation law or Einstein's theory. And therefore, in order to explain what is going on based on astronomy, so what is being proposed is that 95% of the universe is dark matter and dark energy. What that really means is nobody has seen dark matter or dark energy, but it must be somewhere out there. That's why things are moving the way they are. But it's also possible that you don't really need dark matter and dark energy. Perhaps what is needed is to look at this whole question of the observer. The observer has been outside of all physical theories. Observer is the individual. That's where consciousness comes in. And maybe if you looked at this problem from a totally different perspective, this problem will go away, and we'll be able to make a better sense of the physical cosmos itself. You have the physical cosmos, then you have the inner cosmos, the inner space, the inner universe, and that is where psychology or yoga comes in, and that also is of great importance in medical science. And again, as a lot of experts in the West are saying, modern Western medicine is failing when it comes to chronic illnesses, and 90%, 70 to 90% of all published research in the medical sciences cannot be replicated. And part of the reason is that Western medical science does not take the mind as into consideration. You're treating the human being only for the body, but mind and body have a tremendous relationship. And that's why Western science cannot explain why about 35% of the cases, if the patient were just to believe that he's being given a medicine when he's actually been given a sugar pill, the patient will get well. And there are all these paradoxical findings for which Western medicine has to go beyond its current paradigm and go to something much richer. And I think that's where, say, Indian medicine, Ayurveda offers something richer because it also takes the mind into consideration. So all of these factors, but we can't just say because something is in a Sushruta or Charak Samhita, so that's what we have to believe. We must also bring in experimentation and proofs and pramanas into Ayurveda so that it becomes a vital and vibrant science. And people all over the world want to be connected to truth. So if we are able to present it in a modern way, people everywhere will listen. But if you only say that, well, it's in our book and therefore this is the treatment, that's not good enough, because that's what sometimes Ayurvedic doctors say, that, well, it's been proven by the rishis over thousands of years, so we must accept it. That might be fine as a starting point, but we must use logic and experimentation and systems of proof which everybody can relate to, and that is the way to move ahead from where we stand right now.
Yes, thank you. And I think that is what we call the Yuga Dharma. That whatever our spiritual knowledge, it has to be brought into newer forms as per the Yuga Dharma. So if experimentation, and this is the order of the day, there should be a lot of empirical research in Ayurveda, and it has to be brought up to date into the mainstream and not remain alternative anymore. So if I have to summarize so far what we have discussed, it is this importance of our mother tongue, our language in which we are born, because that takes us to understanding of our environment intuitively, that which education is supposed to do. Understanding of oneself and the context is aided by the language one is born in, which gives rise to the capacity of original thinking, creativity, leads to innovation and technology in all the fields, like what Sonam talked about, what Professor Subhash talked about, be it in health or medicine, be it in design or architecture, or be it in technology. So now we move to the other part of how the ecosystem should support this. And that is where we come to the governance. The larger ecosystem that sets policies, whether it is centralized or decentralized, whether it is a parliamentary form or presidential form. What is the right model for India, where in such a diverse country, we do not have any country where we can just cut, copy, paste, because nobody is as diverse as India. India just followed and copied the parliamentary form of system of Britain, which is a very different socio-economic demography. It is not as diverse as India. So, Sonam, would you like to comment on this? What should be the right political model for India? Because Sri Aurobindo has clearly said 100 years ago that it is the presidential form of system with a very strong grassroots panchayat system, that would work. And so your experience in Ladakh and your thoughts about it.
Okay. I don't know what the best system would be, but I feel that the current system is definitely not the best system. It's very sad to see that we have a system where I think we are too democratic too soon. Before people are mature enough to make sense of democracy, we have maybe freedom to do anything, and we end up often using it for more negative things. Democracy is such a beautiful thing, but maybe India should have adopted it in a more Indian way and a little slower way than just taking it straight from the West. I don't know if it is the best thing in the West also, because the way the planet is going, the way the climate change and glaciers melting, these governments of 4 to 5 year terms are not taking good stewardship of the planet. Their visions are mostly for 4 or 5 years, and that's not how a people or the planet can progress. And in India, it has unfortunately, because maybe of this, that we were too free too soon, rather than how in an Indian family, whether in Ladakh or the rest, I think an elder guides you towards your freedom rather than gives you before you even understand the value of the freedom. So because of this ill adoption at a very early stage, or I don't know what, it has become a situation where politics, which is a very pious and beautiful process of democracy, has become a bad word. And people who are left to join politics are often, I wouldn't say always, but often, people who are not able to get any other thing. Whereas governing a country is the most complicated and the most important thing. We have a situation where the best of brains in a school or a classroom go to become engineers and doctors, and the ones that are left become administrators and are on top of those best brains, and the ones who are finally left become the politicians and go on top of the ones who administer to the ones who really were the best brains. So until we have some system whereby the best of India goes into politics, I have not much hopes. Right now, very unfortunately, we have to look into it and clean it if we want to really transform India and bring it to a respectable stage in the world. Clean it so that it doesn't become something where those who have nothing to lose, who have not done well in life, who have criminal records and so on, get into this, and others find it, below their dignity to go into this system. Now, actually this has to be relooked, and maybe we have to overhaul the whole system so that there's some wisdom in the leadership and there's some amount of freedom, but also some amount of firm guidance from the leadership, rather than free for all, oppose for the sake of opposition, and then all our energies are dissipated internally against each other rather than aligned to move forward. So something drastic to overhaul the system, I think, should be there. But regarding parliamentary and presidential, in the current situation, I really feel presidential should perhaps be much better, because in the parliamentary, what I see is that you have to make executives or ministers of the lot that come into politics, and the lot that come into politics right now is really low in standards. Unfortunately, we need to do something. Otherwise, right now, the ones who couldn't do anything come into politics, and among them only you have to make them to lead education, make them lead environment, make them lead health and so on. And you can imagine what to expect when people who do not know much about health are leading health, those who don't know much about environment are leading environment. It will be a total mess. Whereas in the presidential form, you elect like a father figure, like the Kulpati, or I mean the grandfather of the country, like in a family, and then that grandfather nominates the best mind in the country, or can be outside. The president could have invited somebody from India who's doing wonders in England, Africa, or America, to come and serve the nation, and they would come because it would be a dignified position to come and serve the nation. But in today's situation, all their energies, first of all, not the best come in the business. Even if they come, their energies go into fighting the process of politics itself, rather than leading the nation forward. So something really has to be done, and we need not take it as it is from England or America. It's not even doing them good. They are doing much better than what we are doing, but that even is not enough for what the planet needs in 21st century, when we are on the brink of a collapse of the planet.
Yes, so Sonam, I agree with you. And to couple with the Indian civil service system, which is again a colonial hangover, where somebody is elected as a civil servant at 22 or 25, and the same person, is finally advising on any portfolio. So I think what politics and governance group in Transform India would do is to study comparative philosophies, contemporary as well as in the past, in which context what worked. But right now, I think, Professor Subhash, I would think that what US is doing is perhaps the most enlightened of it all. Would you like to shed some idea about the political and governance system that the US is following, the presidential form of system?
Well, the American system, which was created in the late 18th century, has this wonderful idea of checks and balances. The president does not have absolute power. There are three different branches of the government, and they provide checks and balances on each other, which is why the danger that there is to absolute presidential power in certain other arrangements in certain other countries where presidents have eventually become dictators has been avoided in America. So that's a wonderful thing. The other good thing about the American system is, although the president has a lot of power, but most of its power, absolute power, to the extent one can say that, is in its relationships in the foreign affairs. Within there are other, there is also states which have a lot of authority on their own, and so the federal government can only do that much. Now, we must also recognize that the Indian system evolved, the constitution evolved out of an act, an India Act, which was passed in the British Parliament, which had 4,000 pages in the 1930s. An Indian constitution, which is many hundreds or thousands of pages long, is based on that. In contrast to that, the American Constitution is just a few pages, 3-4 pages, and then a few amendments. If you take those also, maybe it's 40 or 50 pages long. So one of the problems within the Indian system is that we have so many rules that any bad administrator can use that rule to create obstacles in you. Of course, a good administrator could also take advantage of those rules and perhaps do things well. So this is, but this is a part of the legacy. And given where we are, if you are operating within the Constitution, what can you do? You can either pass amendments which simplify the Constitution, or what the French did from time to time, they created a new Constitution, right? They are in the 5th or the 6th Republic. So we can do that. But in any event, I think there has been changes. I think the Indian Prime Minister now is much more powerful than, say, 10 years ago or 15 years ago. So in most parliamentary systems, including in England, I think the Prime Minister's office now has become more like the president. So as to how exactly it should be done, can it be done through adaptation of the system that we have inherited so that it's much more effective, and so that we have much more of decentralization, which is one of the problems, that the chief ministers in Indian states have enormously more powers than the governors of states in the US. The governors of the states in the US, all that they do is to create the budget, etc. They don't have the authority to allot land and then decide who does what, and all the kind of stuff that Indian chief ministers do, which is the reason why there is corruption, because the more power you have, the more possibility is that you would at some point become so attached to your power that you'll do things that you should not be doing.
And also,
So
there are
what?
no civil services. There are the best in the field are asked to advise the senators and is that
Yeah,
right?
we don't have a centralized service excepting the foreign service in the US. but the total bureaucracy within the states is very small. You have a few departments, but they just supervise regulations. While in India, the government is also the executive. They also do things. In America, the system is different. In America, what the government does, once they have the funds, then they ask private agencies to do the implementation. So there is no engineering service, for example. There is no medical service in the various states of the US. So the system is very different. The Indian system is that the government is doing everything. The government also runs the temples. Why should they waste their time? Why should the governments in India waste their time running temples, right? So they are taking on more and more of stuff without doing the stuff that they should be doing as well as they should be doing.
These
So there is all this horrible disconnect that we have in India.
So I think this is what with the Rashtrian school we'll be looking at in depth. And also Sampath was saying that Vasisht Ganapati Muni in 1934 had written a constitution for India and in Sanskrit. And we have not, it is not mainstream. We haven't even bothered to find out because he was a rishi. And in India, the concept has been, like Plato said, of philosopher king, that anybody who rules or makes policies has to, the output has to be from his tapas, you know. It is not an exercise of the mind. And that is where spirituality is, that tapas, that work, which comes out to make the world better in different better policies. So I think we were discussing the other day, even things like Vasisht Ganapati Muni's constitution is what we would be studying and seeing how it can be made better. Because again, coming to, let us say, economics and business, which is the other important arm of India, we keep talking of Arthashastra, you know, or Niti Shastra, but that too was for a particular context, you know. He wrote it, Kautilya wrote it for a particular context. We can't just take that as of anything. As Sampath in the very beginning said, that it is creating new forms. We cannot get stuck to the past, neither to Sushrita nor Charaka nor to Arthashastra. But is Adam Smith the answer of the mid 17th century, who spoke about the invisible hand and gave rise to capitalism? Is Karl Marx the answer, who in 100 years later spoke about communism? Or is Keynes the answer, who a few like 50 years ago spoke about what economics should be? May not be either of them. It may be a completely new system which India has to create in economics, you know, in politics, which suits its temperament. So that brings us to this question of education again. You know, how can education be that we produce original thinkers? You know, why did we just copy the British constitution? And it is not just the unwieldiness is not just in the constitution. Today you take up any PWD tender, it runs to 300 pages, and at the end of it there is no clarity, as you said, because each clause renders itself to a lot of interpretation. Whereas even in Asia, countries like Singapore, who are developed, if you do a land deed there, it is a one pager. It's very simple. You know, it's all simplified and kept easy. So we don't have answers. I mean, I don't think after Keynes we have developmental economists like Professor Amartya Sen and others, but we still don't have a comprehensive answer to how economics, for instance, should be for India. Professor Kak, would you like to add to this?
Yeah, before I address that, I should also mention that Britain has no written constitution. They base their decision making or judgments on past precedents. So that gives them greater flexibility to change direction should that be needed. Now, there are no sciences which are for all times. And it's the nature of the world and it's the nature of how we must deal with the world that we have to keep on adjusting because the world keeps on changing, and the kind of remedies that are needed in order to do the best for most of the people, you have to change and fit and this and that. So, but I do hear that there are a lot of initiatives right now out of Delhi and perhaps out of other states as well, that things should be simplified. It's only when things are simplified further that India would be in a better position with position to compete with the rest of the world. There are opportunities, while there are challenges, there are also opportunities. So I think we should put everything on the table. Ganapati Muni's constitution, the ideas that come from it, because sometimes we don't see things which are for everybody to see. So let everything be on the table and people talk about these things, and possibly from the perspective of what is practical and pragmatic. Maybe in Delhi or in the states, uh, they may have to change things slowly. Sometimes you have to change things slowly, adapt, bring in amendments or laws which are able to modernize things, because our ultimate goal should be so that the creative capacities of every citizen have a means of expression, which is not the case right now. As Sonamji pointed out, we have a divide at so many different levels: mother tongue and English, and laws, the way they operate also. These things must be given the highest priority.
And the backbone of a good democracy is the liberal arts education, a liberal arts education which teaches you how to think, because each of us is has the power to vote and to elect, and that to determine how the future of for the next 5 years is going to be. But even if we look at the liberal arts education today, the history, the narratives of history written from foreign viewpoints about India, the study of philosophy, which is limited to the study of darshanas and does not even touch upon Upanishads or the Vedas, which are considered the fountainhead of wisdom in philosophy, or sociological structures, or even psychology, which today we continue to study Freud and Jung, with all due respect to what they have contributed, or the behavioral psychologists like Skinner. But is there something that India should offer? Because the education system, we'll come to that, the final thing of education system. So liberal arts education, even when universities are being set up in that direction, they again end up getting professors from the West and following those very thought systems. So anybody, Sonam, would you like to touch upon liberal arts education, or Professor Kak? What
Professor
needs to
Kak.
be done? What needs to be done in liberal arts education in this country?
Okay, my position is that we haven't done the heavy lifting that is needed. In India, we often talk about, hey, why isn't this being done, or why isn't yoga being taught, or this psychology, or that psychology, or Indian economic system. Somebody in India has to write a book making a powerful case, so that could be used as a text or as a thought leader, setting up the points for discussion. So the hard work that needs to be done has not been done. Somebody has to come together and set up a curriculum, for example, for liberal arts education, which gives a due place to the Indian contributions to all these subjects, the arts and literature and everything else. We haven't done that, which is the reason why the new liberal arts universities and colleges that are being set up in India are being modeled after Western ones, which is not to say that the Western things are not great. We also love the West, but there is so much to be gained from the Indian experience, from Indian history, that if Indians were provided all of that in school and college, and then they can also go to the classics of Western literature and really come up with their own synthesis. But the way things are happening is that the Indian perspective is being completely left out. And for that, now of course there are things outside of college, etc., various ashrams or different centers that have been formed. The Sri Aurobindo Center. Now there are things being done at individual places, but perhaps the Transform India initiative could take some of these problems and create the curriculum, and maybe also do things so that the many corporate houses that we have in India, which are very powerful also, who also want to do things for India, but they don't know how to go about doing it. So if one could set up some kind of a communication with these other sources of strength within the country and have them fund part of these studies, perhaps they could form the nucleus for change.
Yes, and you were also mentioning like 100 books, Indian books that have to be studied. Make a list of that, because that brings us to this art and culture or literature, where even if there is a huge need in India to go back to what was in the Mahabharata, what was in the Ramayana, but it is going through writers who have somehow begun to do it in that reductionist model, playing to the again the Western audience. Because in India, literature was not to humanize things, it was to make things larger than life, because these were archetypal. For instance, the sword of Achilles is explained in 18 pages. Why? Or in Raghuvansham, Ramayana, Ram his eyes, is written about in like shloka after shloka, because these were the heroes we created who were larger than life, who could take it to, those were the archetypes. But even in art and culture, we see the things tendency towards humanizing, more than raising. It's like more playing to the gallery. Art and culture has become, rather than uplifting, as Beethoven would say, the entire town to art. So where do you think, what is art and culture does India need to do so that the stories, uh, you know, so that we don't, first of all, limit ourselves to just Jataka tales and Panchatantra? We have much more. If a BBC can recontextualize Sherlock Holmes, as it has done in its recent series, why can't we recontextualize so much of a rich, culture and literature? That is point number one. And point number two, why do we need to interpret it in a very reductionist way to make it accessible? What should be done?
Well, these will always be challenges because reductionism is the easy thing to do. And that will always be a complementary side to the synthesis. So these would always be two complementary sides of education. So we cannot just throw out reductionism. So to that extent, Western education and Western scientific and social science disciplines will be a useful context to study the creative and the synthetic aspects to all of these disciplines. So these will be like two wings of the bird, and we must have both. We cannot just, because when we as we are growing up and in our own lives, there are both these aspects to our lives. One is the physical aspect, and the other is the deeper spiritual and transcendent aspect. And we cannot say that everybody should only be devoted to the spiritual aspect, because we all have different temperaments, when we are also individuals where we are relating to each other as agents, as physical agents. So we must do both. And I think that's where we may not have, in our efforts to create a wonderful new curriculum which addresses both these aspects, we may not have done a good job, because for emotional reasons, we may have been stressing the synthetic aspects much more. So maybe what needs to be done, as many deep thinkers in the West have also recognized, that in school education, for example, we must emphasize music much more, or meditation much more. And how to do that effectively, we don't know, but clearly Indian schools maybe don't have as much of music and arts, which are activities where you sit down and do things in a free manner. maybe that needs to have a um, greater role in the formation of the personality of the child
Thank you.
than has been done, where more emphasis has been given to specific skills related to, say, math or physics, etc.
So
Maybe
we
those
come
things should be
back
done. Yeah.
to, yes. So this is what we come to finally, education. And Sonam, would you like to add to this? You have been in the field of education and where you've been trying to do all of these things. So what would you like to add to what Professor Kak just spoke about?
In the field of education, unfortunately, again, we are copying and aping whatever we get from the West. But I think this is one field where actually India should be giving leadership to the world in many ways. Yeah. Particularly now with the COVID situation and schools going haywire, things all, totally different from the past. Are we going to the same schools back, or are we using it to change a quantum leap? I think again here India has a great possibility of giving leadership to the world. The schools of the past were, as you know, copied from the West. Industrial factory schools, which did more of paper and chalk. I call it chalk, talk, and paper education. These talks were perhaps valuable till recently when you didn't have internet as much or online possibilities as much. But now with the COVID, we have realized that we already have the means. And even otherwise, so many students were already getting the best of the talk part from the internet. The talk part, our teachers may never match the world's best, the nation's best that would be available on internet. So if we still consider schools as the talk centers, then our students will not be entertained. They'll actually misbehave. Already we hear children not paying attention. Why would they pay attention to a very a shadow of what they get on internet as lectures, as talks? So this is natural. Instead, we should perhaps base our schools on ancient Indian wisdom from Buddha's time. For example, um, learning was kind of wisdom, insight, intuition, pragya. And pragya used to be three types, I learned. Shrutmai pragya, which is the heard wisdom, which is what we used to get in lectures from teachers. You can make tea by boiling water, put the leaves and add sugar, and you serve tea. But the child learns to say that and write that in exams and may get even 10 on 10, but they don't learn how to make tea. So therefore, Shrutmai Panya or Pragya is not enough. The second part they say is Chintanmai Pragya, where you reflect, which is also hardly there in the old system. We only memorize what we are told. We don't even apply our own minds. Creativity is completely missing. We are supposed to write exactly as the book says or as the teacher said. In the Chintanmai Pragya, I think the West is a little better because they give value to analytical, thinking and critical thinking and so on. But where we can lead is in Bhavanamai Pragya, which is experiential, where you actually go through it. That's what is Bhavanamai Pragya. And experiential is the path of the future in education. Now that's why I say that the Shruttamai Pragya should come from internet. We should relegate it to internet, not use our schools for doing a poor job of what is already available online. The Chintanmai has to happen in the child's mind itself. But the Bhavnamai Pragya should happen in schools. Schools should be a place where children go to work together with other children and with the teachers to apply what they learned and what they reflected upon in real life. So this the internet can never replace for hundreds of years or thousands of years. The real touch of real world is what schools can give in 3 dimensions. And that's what schools of the future should be used. And I think this model India could give to itself and to the world, of looking at schools as the application ground, as the place, as the karm bhumi, where you actually apply, where you have gardens to grow things, where you have projects on which children work and solve the problems of the people in the region. Similarly, another thing we took from West blindly was this, education is about 3 hours, reading, writing, arithmetic, just mental intellectual exercises. Whereas what we have been saying in Ladakh is that it should not be 3 hours, it should actually be 3 H's. The bright head education, education to sharpen your mind. The 3 R's is important, but beyond that, it's about skills of the hands also. The hand part of the second H is equally important if our children have to be really independent and capable. Then we should lay a lot of emphasis on skills of the hands, which the government is now trying to, and where we somehow lagged behind because we blindly adopted their 3 R's type of education, and they themselves did do well with more hands-on education. But where again India can lead and transform itself is in the third H, which is the heart part, the kind heart, the kind compassionate heart, which then brings the hands and the head together for the good of humanity. And an education and upbringing of this kind can never be harmful for humanity and the living beings on the planet. This will be the dharma that will see the planet through, and not blind chase after whatever we can do with science, produce green sheep and brown horses and blue ducks. That's a stupid application of what you can do, lacking wisdom and the heart of not doing what all you can do. So that wisdom, that spirituality part has to be added, and India can very well do that and leapfrog in education to the rest of the world by adding this dimension of the heart to the system, is what I think.
Yes, Sonam, I completely agree. And I think it is so interesting that Subhashji started with intuition and pragya. And Sonam, you ended with pragya and intuition and bhavana. And that is exactly what Sri Aurobindo says is the next step in human evolution, is going beyond the mind, not the logical, critical mind, but developing the faculties of higher mind and intuitive mind and bringing it to solve the problems, and going beyond the superficial heart, which is the desire heart, into the soul, the psychic heart, where there is fundamental unity with nature, and which is the first step towards growing into spiritual beings. So we come to this conclusion that the outer reflection of all our models, our social, economic, and political models, is actually a reflection of who we are inwardly and spiritually. So education, therefore, becomes that final backbone to any society where the evolution of consciousness and the growth of human possibilities to the higher mind, to intuition in one way, and to deeper heart is what will solve the problems of the future. So Transform India will be working on this paradigm that one has to become a swarat first, because before one becomes a samrat. One has to go through personal transformation before one can execute any social transformation. But India has suffered from the other extreme. It has always been more about personal transformation, about individual liberation, and has left matter to as Maya, an illusion. And Sri Aurobindo has reclaimed that knowledge of the Vedas once again, where spirituality was not an escape from materiality into some beautiful beyond, but it was bringing that kingdom of heaven on this earth through tapas, through surrender, through the awakening of the inner heart and the higher mind. And he talks about minds beyond that into the supramental consciousness. But that is the first part of the journey, ascent to reach the higher consciousness, and where most of the yogas in India ended in the past many thousand years. But Sri Aurobindo says integral yoga starts where other yogas finish. So once the one is liberated from desire, from attachment and ego, that is when actually one becomes the right instrument to do action on earth. Because before that, one is only doing for personal benefit. So if one just leaves the earth into some beyond, one is free, then it is a very wrong use of one's instrumentality. So Sri Aurobindo says that once one has freed oneself and liberated individually, Jiji Vishet Shatam Samaha, one should wish, as Isha says, to live for 100 years, because only then you can be a true worker of the divine, a true instrument, because you get the higher intuition, you are free from ego, desire and attachment, you are in turn connected with your inner heart, one with the universe, one with everybody, through kindness and compassion. And only then we can create the right models in every field. So we end with this and take up a few questions if there are. And I would like to say that we just touched upon these 12 areas today, but each of these would be taken up into concrete action steps in each of the webinars every 2 months, in between the webinars, the other webinars of 12 domains of Sri Aurobindo's thought. And in each of these, we would have actual mentors and mentees working with all these great ideas and creating new forms of where India needs to be. It is a project for the next 50 years, and it is a project for all of us. And Transform India does not belong to anybody. It belongs to the future, and it is a platform where everybody is invited to join, because it should become in a few years as that platform which is free. It is, everything is copyleft here, nothing is copyright. We bring our best insights, our best research, put it here. If the great rishis of the Vedas could leave their work without claiming any authorship to it, we can at least this much leave our insights on transformindia.com, so that the future generations and the contemporary ones can draw upon it and bring changes in their fields of work.
It was wonderful deliberations, and we have overshooted the time. And instead of going for a question answer, I would like to invite Dr. Mala Kapadia ji to give the vote of thanks.
Before Malaji comes in, maybe one line from Professor Kak and one line from Sonam Wangchuk on the need to transform India.
I would only echo what Sonam ji said about the 3H as this one single line which is going to be transformative, not only in India, but all across the world. 3H approach to education. I think that's what we should be stressing. It's just one line. It goes to the very heart of the problem and the solution.
Sonam?
One thing I really feel missing in India more and more every year is trust. We need to fill this trust deficit between people, between family members, between government and people, and then everything can be simplified. Why the constitution is complex, why there are 1,000-page documents for everything, is because there is no trust. And you try to solve trust with all kinds of lines and pages, nothing will work. Trust should be brought back.
Thank you. Malaji, over to you.
Yeah. It has been a wonderful evening with the best of the speakers. And not only the 3H, but I think the entire evening flow out of the heart. And the integration of head was there, but more than that, our gratitude to Sri Mother and Sri Aurobindo for guiding all of us through this process. And on behalf of Safik, I thank Gitanjali for bringing this Transform India together. so that it's not just a conceptual or deliberation which we all do together and forget about it, but there are action steps, there is actual change makers that would spread out in the world and make sure that we are changing and bringing down the higher consciousness in every act that we do. So, Subhash Kakji and Sonamji, it has been wonderful to listen to you. We began from education and we ended with Pragya. We began with crisis that science and humanity is facing, and we ended up with what India and our rishis, and Sri Aurobindo has been into the rishi parampara. So, what is the rishi knowledge that we need to integrate in our own action, and we need to spread it through the youth to not only India but to the world? So, my gratitude and thank you again, all the speakers. Sampatji, back to you for silence.
So I think with this, we will end today's session. So maybe a few seconds silence in invocation, and then we sign off. And also, before we end, our heartfelt thanks to all the collaborators, all the volunteers who have joined this collective effort in taking forward this Mahayajna. Dhanyavad.